multiplayer battle arena or team arena battler genre is a subgenre of the MOBA genre, the multiplayer online battle arena genre, which is also a genre of another genre. Anyway, the team arena battler genre is not very populous as a genre, and perhaps you will feel for good reason after watching this video. But it is a genre that always managed to draw attention, excitement, and eventual burnouts. While the pioneer in the field, Stunlock Studios is not the topic of this video. Hey guys, we are covering another multiplayer battle arena, or team arena battler, this time created by some ex-Riot, Bungie, Blizzard, and Valve developers, forming what would be known as TheoryCraft Games and launching their game Supervive back in July of 2025. While Supervive was a team arena battler, it would also blend elements of the battle royale genre, and many others, like the hero shooter genre, and even of course the MOBA genre. This would make it stand alone quite uniquely and offer a blend of gameplay not before seen in the space. However, Supervive, despite showing up in a super way, would within just a few months of its official launch have less than 1,300 players playing at the peak, and as of the time of this video, after the announcement of the shutdown of the game December 2025, is only 40 players playing, with the target shutdown date set at the end of February 2026, the same month this video will be dropping. What went wrong with a project that seemed to take momentum and then flight, and yet so soon after seemed to crash to the ground without a respite? Well, we're going to investigate exactly why Supervive failed to catch on with gamers and the largest contributing factors to the death of the game, set for a close future. This is what we do on the Death of a Game series in general, a series where we investigate said factors by navigating a timeline of events pre and post launch of the game and attempting to find clues utilizing developer testimonies, patch notes, and detective intuition, of course, our most important tool. This all culminates in a final deduction, where we piece the case together in true detective fashion. But really, for those who missed any of the clues along the way, ending the episode with a clue on what the next case will be about too. And so, detectives, what is Supervive, and why is it already saying goodbye? The story begins with the founding of the company behind our case file star, TheoryCraft Games, which was founded by industry veterans from Riot Games, Bungie, Blizzard, and even Valve in Santa Monica, California back in 2020. This was an all-star cast coming together with the goal of making a serious impact in multiplayer gaming where their strengths would lie. Leading the charge was the likes of Jess Nam, who would become the face of Supervive, a former EP and vice president of Riot Games. Joe Tung, also known as Lee Sin, another former EP at Riot, and many more Riot names such as Sai Lee, Kyle Leach, Jeff Zhang, and Jordan Anton, all former designers on League of Legends, and more such as Andrew Yip, Michael Evans, and Moby Frankie, who worked on Legends of Runeterra, Valorant, and even Teamfight Tactics. We also had a former game director from Bungie who worked on Halo Reach and Destiny, Mike Tipple, and Joshua Morrison, who was a senior artist on Destiny 2. This was, by all intents and purposes, a rather stacked team. Sure, some of the leaders seemed to be the classic producer types where you're never really sure how much value they offer in the end, but they take all the credit, seemingly by design. But they had plenty of talented developers alongside that as well. They would end up raising an impressive $87.5 million according to Crunchbase, that funding coming from investors like Makers Fund and Andreessen Horowitz. 3 years later, and TheoryCraft Games would announce their first project, Project Loki, showcasing some pre-alpha footage in the summer of 2023, introduced by Jeff Tung, or Lee Sin. Project Loki was described as League meets Apex meets Smash Brothers. You will choose a fully customizable character and a top-down MOBA-style visual scheme, with a more locked camera approach, which is kind of like a founding ideal of the team arena battler genre. Think playing a MOBA with your camera attached to your main character. But Project Loki wasn't just a MOBA. The game was part hero shooter, part MOBA, part battle royale, part action game, part arena battler, you get the idea. In Project Loki, you would choose your hero, or hunter, and grind them up on NPCs, then choosing your gear and purchasing it, and then doing battle over a large map. So essentially existing in kind of like 3 separate phases. Of course, gaining power throughout the phases, leading to the eventual final phase where the final map is shrinking, and in that shrinking process, you must be the last team standing in order to win. That means taking out the other enemy teams as you try to survive the shrinking map. There seemed to be a lot to offer with this concept, but upon first viewing, you can tell they weren't totally sure what they wanted the game to be, and what they wanted their 1-2 knockout punch for Project Loki to be. Sure, you can have mini-game aspects in your game, but you also have to have your own main gameplay loop hit and be effective, even if it's a copy. While I applaud them for being open about wanting feedback early on, when you design a catch-all style game that has elements from so many different styles of games and genres, the kind of feedback you're probably going to get is going to be a nightmare to parse anyway, because you're mixing like 5 genres together, and people who have preferences are going to advocate for the game being more like the game genre they like, of course. This is the issue with hybrid games historically. They often try to appeal to many groups of players, 2 or more, in this case, more, and in the end fail to actually serve or secure an actual secure audience, instead hoping for an imaginary one to exist, because, well, vibes and all that. While getting your game compared to high-profile games is a compliment, hearing Lee Sin get so excited to hear Smash, League, and Apex as comparisons was a bit worrying to me. These are vastly different games, each having their own strengths and problems. Combining them together or being unaware of that could lead to more problems. It was problematic. While Supervive would self-fund their new project largely on their own through their own funding rounds, they would team up with an Eastern publisher, attempting to access the absolutely gargantuan market that dwarfs the entire Western market, especially with the MOBA-style games. Nexon and NetEase would team up and handle things in Japan and Korea, and then China respectively, covered by NetEase, the Chinese company. This might seem like a small thing, but these sorts of publishers don't just team up for anything. They want to make money and make an impact in their markets, which meant they saw the potential of Project Loki, probably because it had so many Riot Games developers, and, well, it also was very accessible as a game to test, play, and form an opinion about, which I must commend TheoryCraft for. These sorts of pushes aren't just shipping the game in a new region. The marketing pushes have to be different, focused on different things. And oftentimes the actual game itself has to make certain concessions as well. And there's just, simply put, more money here being spent on trying to make the game go global that hasn't even gone local yet. You can't just team up with publishers and think that they're gonna foot the bill without having expectations that they're gonna get a return on their investment, of course. But TheoryCraft games would go on, big pressure on them or not. The gameplay would largely stay the same at its core, with some new improvements over time, as TheoryCraft Games would announce their new project, shedding its project moniker and becoming Supervive. No, not another game name in the Death of Game series I just don't vibe with, if you will. I just don't know what it communicates. It feels like a little too buzzwordy for me. I mean, I'll go through a list. Minecraft, Fortnite, League of Legends, Overwatch, you catch my drift. They all explain what the you're doing. But hey, maybe we had to Supervive it with the boys to understand it. I'm sorry. Anyway, the only new thing I could find during this press blitz was the fact that the game was being called by some outlets a battle royale. Uh-oh, a clue. And by others, a hero shooter mixed with League of Legends. You know, 2 games that aren't battle royales. While we can blame the press for this, as I normally do in the virtual world space, I think the confusion here is clear and stems from the game's confusing direction. But early impressions were positive, with reports of interesting characters to play and utilize, and a skill-based top-down fully aimed action game to boot. All the skill-based combat you can imagine with game hits in the genre, and probably the pioneers of the genre, Battle Right, and the one that came before it, Bloodline Champions. Players in Supervive would spawn and farm lower-level camps throughout the game before moving to higher-level bosses to then grow in power and, purchase more items, with the map even having a day and night cycle, where the night is supposed to be more dangerous. Points of interest do also exist, like bonfires which allow you to repair and upgrade your items. After players would survive the early and mid-game phases, they then reach the final phase where they have to fight to the death with other players across a large map with tons of barriers, walls, and of course, things that are gonna take you out. And well, places for you to fall to your death, of course, because players utilize their gliders to navigate and avoid being left behind and killed outside of a circle. But be careful. If you're hit when your glider is in a exhausted state, you can fall to your death. So don't use your glider without, planning ahead. The gameplay was interesting and super fun and high octane, if a bit mixed in terms of what to expect. The core combat, though, was based on the multiplayer battle arena formula, or Team Arena Battler, whatever you'd like to call them, despite being a battle royale game, though, in its core, mechanics. And I mean just in terms of the game mode you're playing. And then you have these heroes you choose from, like, a hero shooter or a MOBA, and you make money by killing minions, just like a MOBA. Steamfest would allow Supervive to be playable for the first time publicly, October 10th, 2024, for around a week's time, making the game fully playable with no NDA in place. And this would become the time that the game really shined, in my opinion. Supervive was fun, and full of high-octane action. It was a great game to play for short sessions. But would it stand the test of time? This is the greatest question to ask of any multiplayer battle arena game or team arena battler, whichever you prefer to call it. Referring to the likes of custom games in StarCraft, Warcraft, and of course the two major games we already mentioned in the genre, which kind of made them a thing commercially, Bloodline Champions and Battlerite. Both, by the way, Stunlock Studios projects, and the latter of which I've already covered on the series before. These two games and nearly all other games featured in this subgenre are featured in a subgenre of a subgenre. MOBAs became their own genre, but they actually spawned from a other genre dubbed the real-time strategy genre or RTS genre. Team arena battlers spawned from RTSs, or thus, you get it, MOBAs. But why did MOBAs find so much broad success? Well, we should probably start there, detectives. Well, because they were simplified versions of a more complex genre, the RTS genre, where you had to control more than one character, sometimes hundreds, while also moving around a map you attempted to control. A MOBA is just one character being controlled, usually. So then, what about a team arena battler? Well, it's a play on the idea of what if you don't grind or farm for 15 minutes anymore and just fight for the majority of the game. A team arena battler is a vertical slice of a vertical slice, and I'm not convinced this is a genre that can exist without, dipping into other genres. To kind of like full up that body that they have and become more than just like a battle arena simulator. I made this assertion in my Battlerite video as well, and the developers on that game not only liked my video, they invited me to play and test their next game, which would actually become their biggest hit commercially yet, showing that they learned from their mistakes, V Rising. A game that took elements of Battlerite, but built the rest of a game around it. Sure, you might think that Supervive is more than just a team arena battler, and it kind of is, with all the other genre elements blended in, but the further elements thrown in just further complicate the balance and actual game direction further, because the core of the game is a team arena battler stuck in the body or game mode of a battle royale. Supervive's open beta would take place in November of 2024, and this is where we can see the population for the game for the first time publicly, reaching as many as 47,000 players publicly. These are super impressive numbers, but like with all multiplayer games, the most important thing would be how long they could maintain such a population, or even manage to grow it. The normal creators who are paid for whenever there needs to be like a big marketing push for a new game made their rounds, all covering Supervive on their YouTube and Twitch channels, which was kind of expected at this point. The problem I have with it is that it was this like carte blanche approach of like, well, roll the dice and hope your game works with such general audiences who don't have a loyalty to you. They would do this by funding a creator cup, clearly trying to showcase how competitive and, well, streamer fun the game was. This must have easily cost them like $1 million or more to set up in marketing, considering they even had the likes of Tyler 1 involved as well. But Supervive seemed to also contact some smaller, more niche creators as well, so they didn't strike me as someone trying to do a pump and dump with celebrity names or anything. They were just going for a tried and true strategy that wasn't always working. Supervive during this state would be dubbed by some as early access, incorrectly I think, as it's actually announced to be kind of like open beta, and it would then be covered by some lesser known gaming outlets in the process, but have very little in-depth coverage from any major gaming outlets, which is interesting. Some would cover it during this phase, surely, but from this point on, no major video game outlet seems to follow the project in depth anymore. My detective intuition tells me this is because they weren't paying the major advertising outlets, instead choosing to put themselves out there with the, creators and stuff, and rely on things like community participation and word-of-mouth advertising, which is a very strong force. Season 0, which introduced a new warped equipment system, the game's first battle pass, and a new Hunter and Bebo, would drop January 8th, 2025. Though there was a warning hidden in the midst of all of this, one that I caught with my magnifying glass. The warning that TheoryCraft Games hadn't figured out what game they wanted to make yet and were deeming it still to be a very experimental game, which was not something you wanted to hear the same year the game was supposed to drop. I think opening your game to outside feedback is commendable, especially early on in its incredibly important, early phases. But if your game design isn't solidified to a point, that can actually be quite dangerous and damaging, as you sort of create this Frankenstein project without any clear end in mind. This was a game that already had dozens of millions involved. They couldn't afford to have a player base build the game for them, not when historically that isn't a fruitful form of commercial development. Supervive would shift more into the MOBA territory with their Gold Now Mattering patch, which I, dubbed it that out of convenience, sorry, introducing a revamped economy for the game, one that would allow players to accrue more power and have more advantages to take around the map for further phases. But some people didn't like the changes, such as the base team arena battler gamers, who didn't want to have to grind for more power and just wanted to fight. And even for some of the Battle Royale players who aren't as keen on doing that sort of thing on average. And this is where I could imagine that parsing feedback for TheoryCraft games for such a hybrid mixed game must have been an absolute, dreadful experience, because every change they made would push the game further into one of the other identities that it was utilizing, losing some of the other fans in the process, being like this precious balancing act. Balance, yeah. That was going to be nearly impossible with such a game like this. But Supervive had managed to generate a considerable amount of hype, and as launch would edge closer and closer, would reach as many as 1 million players. But in a shocking turn of events, Supervive, just a day before launching fully, would pull a reverse NGE, or new gaming experience, from Star Wars Galaxies, and would drop a complete revival or reinvention patch dubbed the 1.0 patch. There's a lot of changes to cover with this, so bear with me, but the patch would bring with it, most importantly, the armory system. A post-game progression system that allowed you to acquire more powerful items and, keep acquiring them later on. You would now acquire a new currency, dubbed Prisma, and dying makes you lose half of it whenever you're playing. So make sure to try to extract some of it, and obviously the easiest way to do that is making it out of live. Prisma is spent on the armory, which allows you to then open capsules, which, kind of sound like loot boxes. And then these loot boxes have equipment. The armory system also would change how armor worked in the game, making the armor now 2 grips, which come with a stat or simple passive along with them, kicks, aka your boots or movement option, and 2 relics, which were major effects, and then of course your 5 perks. Relics now replaced powers in the game and were the major core. Many of the powers of the old were turned into consumables or just moved to perks. The capsules you purchase with Prisma allow you to then unlock these gear pieces and consumables when purchasing in the armory, which after purchasing in the armory allow you to then purchase in-game, unlocking the new piece of armor. Holding the same item multiple times allows you to reach a higher level of rarity or stars, increasing in power. This system overall added more specific role ability to the game, and less ability of heroes being able to be like catch-alls and having tools for everything. But the problem was that it also made the game just more grindy in the long term, which might have seemed like a good solution for the burnout problem they were suffering from since they showcased the game in open beta, but really is just another way to create a wedge between the new and old players, as well as feed into the already existing frustration that comes with such a game like this. That's both a high skill floor game and a high skill ceiling game. It's also a battle royale team arena battler. This kind of game requires precision movement and aiming, and the ability to team fight exceedingly well. If you aren't good at these things already, the only way to get good at them in Supervive is to keep getting beat up by players who are better than you, with very little learning systems within the game. Sure, there was a warm-up mode where you could test out some hunters and play with a micro-economy to speed up the economy, to speed up the gameplay, but this mode is against players and not bots. You can't fight against bots easily in the game, well, unless you count just playing the game normally, which would actually artificially insert bots into the matchmaking, a classic of most Battle Royale games, but not something that most MOBAs or even Battle Arena games had. The 1.0 update brought tons of changes alongside this. Expansion of the map, aka the breach, slower time to kill, better matchmaking, and the ability to recall and teleport to teammates. But with these changes, there seems to be a resounding sigh from the game's already limited community. They felt like despite all signs of, what they were going to get before, Supervive just got cold feet at the last second and decided to ignore the same feedback they claimed to have been living by and do their own thing. That was because, as TheoryCraft Games would state, they didn't have a choice because, although people were enjoying the game rating-wise, they weren't sticking around for long. So making changes would have been fine if they worked in the end, of course, but as we will find out shortly, the 1.0 changes, which changed so much, did very little to stop the bleeding of players leaving the game and very little to attract any new or on-the-fence players too. And oh, did I mention that the armory system was reset every season, which made it seem and feel even more arbitrary, or worse, totally related to how the game was supposed to generate revenue, besides the battle pass and skins in the game, since it was a free-to-play game, and of course that's an oxymoron, because even free-to-play games need to make money, nothing's free. TheoryCraft Games would respond to the criticisms of this big update following the launch of the game, stating they would do a better job to stay in touch with the wider Supervive audience, acknowledging the NPE, or new player experience, needed work, and promising to notify the community about major changes before fully implementing them, which is kind of obvious. I mean, it was a good response, but seemingly an unneeded one. The release of Supervive would come globally on Steam July 24th, 2025. Being an exclusively PC-launched product, while we don't have our trusty Metacritic to inform us about the public reception of the game, critical and player opinions alike, we do have Steam reviews from the players who participated in the game, rating the game at 84% from over 13,000 players. This was pretty impressive for a new studio. According to the reviews, starting with the positive, players enjoyed the fun, unique blend of hero shooter, battle royale, and MOBA, and above all, how fun the game was. With veterans of Battlerite and Blood Champions, of course, suggesting that this might be the game that's going to be right up your alley if you like those games. But that's where the negatives also start to creep in. People were bewildered at the inclusion of loot boxes in a sense that dictated your ability to perform in the game. Imagine if League of Legends made it to where you had to open random chests that gave you the random items you could purchase in-game. One player said, "A strange thought for a MOBA-adjacent styled game, making it hard for new players to be competitive, especially when it was said to take up to 40 hours to grind out your armory fully to unlock all of the items, which could take some casual players weeks." With other major cries of the player base feeling that TheoryCraft hadn't been listening to the fans, which of course I already mentioned they acknowledged later on. 15k peak players would be reached, but that was a far cry from their open beta numbers, which reached 40,000 plus, now just at 4,200 players concurrently too. Attempting to feed this new audience, TheoryCraft Games would put out a series of patches, introducing new characters, or hunters as they are called in Supervive, and a number of balance changes. But after this, the population would drop off a cliff to just 3,200 players peak and only 1,100 players concurrently. This is when panic would start to settle in for TheoryCraft, who had gathered 87.5 million in funding, of which they likely used a large amount for Supervive, and well, they were going to need a major return on this investment. In patch 1.04, the September patch, TheoryCraft Games would unlock the armory entirely, promising to make bigger changes to the game's overall meta progression system, which sadly did very little to stop the major bleed the game was suffering from, as now it's just down to 1,200 players peak, or 500 concurrently. Season 2 couldn't come sooner, as the game seemed to fade even more into obscurity by the moment. October 21st, 2025, and this season would showcase again for me that TheoryCraft Games was in over their heads. Although the update had mostly positives alongside to it, according to the remaining player base, but that player base was only just under 1,000 players peak now. That meant if you wanted to experience the new hunter, who was Nyx, which is also my dog's nickname by the way, you had to brave through potentially 5-minute queues on average. And when you did get a match, you were not matched fairly, being matched up against players who were far more experienced than you because there just wasn't enough players to create a healthy, ranked, or normal ecosystem. This is a sad thing to continue to witness in so many different games, because inevitably, the small population will cannibalize itself, including any new players who jump into the fray, further keeping the game from both maintaining a healthy population and acquiring new players. More updates would come, as TheoryCraft Games would attempt to plug the sinking boat with Cork, adding a new mode, the Domination mode, which featured kind of a larger team battle mode and a number of balance and technical updates alongside it, because the game, despite a lower system requirement, was actually still causing things like blue screens of death and crashes on startup. We also get to see some tournament mode changes to accompany the tournament mode that was previously launched in the previous month. But for me, this feels like a totally lost effort. While this is a cool thing to have in a game, when your house is on fire, not many people are going to be caring about how you redid your flooring. I just mean that the changes people want to see from the game were more correlated, where the fire was, and cries for even a return to previous and better versions reportedly. But what if I told you this was kind of a fruitless endeavor? And I will explain, as don't worry, I'm not the villain or annoyingly vague hero. I'm a detective. I always explain my hunches, or deductions, or argue my position in the comments section. Has anyone wondered why Supervive, despite having an incredibly good rating and set of player reviews for a no multiplayer game, was unable to keep its player base around? Well, sadly, we catch a repeat culprit in the series. And well, that's why I made this series in a major way. It's because I didn't want developers or players alike to keep making the same mistakes as before. And well, that happens here. With all the big money and big former executive names involved, we made a fatal error in our game design. Well, they did. TG designed Supervive, a game that was a burnout machine, creating it naturally. That's because a vertical slice of a vertical slice is already a niche by literal definition. And when a niche is very competitive to even just pick up to play, aka a high skill floor, it also has to allow for downtime for players to lick their wounds and find activities to do outside of, the normal game. In Supervive, you have no chance to rest. Games are between 10 to 20 minutes long and total high-octane combat filled for the majority of them, which is great, but kind of exhausting. I mean, how many times in a day can you skydive, for example? And then you go to the next game and to the next game, and suddenly you're playing 3 to 5 games in just 1 hour, and totally exhausted. Especially if you can't identify what's going wrong for you, or you don't have prior experience with such a game. Now you might say, well, NS, isn't that what Valorant, League, and Dota and other games that you already mentioned do? And the answer is no. Those games launched with alternative modes built into them, and also allow you within each match to have plenty of downtime, even the shooters. Supervive didn't have that. Its downtime was even designed to still be fast-paced, as you're playing a battle royale at the core of it, where as the time runs out, the map starts to shrink until everyone must fight in the smallest remaining areas. And at the same time, it didn't have the complexity of any of the games that I just mentioned as well, which also would help a game to feel more endlessly replayable, like a game like chess, a game that's like hundreds of years old. Supervive could have added all of the changes that they wanted, but this, and the fact that the game was this massive hybridized product amalgamation led to a small target market, and a burnout problem for said small target market, making the game nearly unfixable. Which is why likely many of you watching now, of course, with the gift of hindsight, weren't surprised what came next. December 16th, 2025, which was the announcement from TheoryCraft Games that they would be shutting down Supervive, set to shut down in February of 2026. This would anger fans as they felt like TheoryCraft Games took their ball and went home quite quickly, with the game only being out for like 6 months. But I've covered moves like this in the past, when covering independent gaming studios. These are moves of survival. This was a sign that they probably didn't want to move on, but if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to keep existing as a studio. Which is a bummer, because you then end up losing a bit of trust after such a thing. But TheoryCraft Games, for all of their mistakes, are a talented studio and a group of people, from my experience. Based on the fun and competitive game they created, they just didn't have the business design figured out. They wanted another shot at being able to accomplish it the second time, which meant cutting ties with Supervive, a title that was only being played by a couple hundred players. Before doing that completely though, they would drop their final patch the day after the announcement. This patch would include another large team arena mode, showing that this was kind of something that they wanted to test more so. But unfortunately, they would lock a lot of these modes behind having to actually level up to level 20, which meant that players never got the chance to actually say, hey, Supervive works, but maybe not as a battle royale. Anyway, this new mode, Prisma Party, would function kind of like that undead tree map in Heroes of the Storm, and the final patch would also unlock the game's store. Now, Supervive is set to be shuttered in just a few weeks as of the launching of this video, in February of 2026 by the way, and the timeline has reached an end. This means we have reached the final deduction detectives, and it's time to deduce why Supervive is set to be shut down so soon. Why did Supervive die and find itself on the death of a game series? Mixed game design and target market, not enough downtime and thus too much burnout, a rushed launch and marketing, major changes that anchored the community and seemingly were not based on feedback nor warned about. It was a slice of a slice of a slice. They didn't seem to learn from market research that existed or watch my series. Supervive wasn't around super long. Okay, come on. I had to make at least one more super pun in this video, but I think its biggest impact was hopefully giving TheoryCraft Games the confidence to really start to achieve their next goal and use this as like a proper learning experience, because hey, I think they've showcased already that they have some talent, since making something fun, period, is not an easy thing to do. But I also worry, because a studio filled with executive know-it-all producers, who somehow didn't know any of the other competitives they were, being compared to, is puzzling. But maybe TG is the type that needs to learn on the job. Inexpensive habit. Let me know what you think of TheoryCraft Games' chances to make their next game a good one, or what you thought of Supervive, their first one, in the comments below. Detectives, until the next case, one set to be one of our most thorough and high-profile cases yet in the massive multiplayer online RPG in virtual world space.
Hey guys, my name is Steven Sharif, and I'm the creative director here at Intrepid Studios. We're working on an upcoming MMORPG named Ashes of Creation.